Chapter 4, Loops Part 4. So the do loop is the third type of loop in Java, the first being the while, the next being the for, and the third and final being the do loop. The do loop is a post-test loop. That means that you test the loop control condition after executing the loop one time. In both the while and the for loops, the loop control condition is tested before the loop is entered. So the do loop will always be executed at least once. There are still three parts to the loop: initialize the loop control condition, test the loop control condition, and update the loop control condition. But notice, the initialization takes place outside the loop. Then we enter the loop with the keyword do at the top of the loop, followed by an open brace. The body of the loop is next, followed by the update of the loop control condition, in the case of this example, I++, followed by a close brace, and the expression while, followed by the test of the loop control condition, in parentheses, and a semicolon at the end. Unlike the while loop and the for loop, the do loop does have a semicolon at the end of the while condition. Here's an example. Assume that we want to make sure that the user enters a value in a specific range. Do loops are very good for range checking. We would initialize our variable, or excuse me, we'd create our variable int value, enter the loop, do system.out.println, enter an integer less than 100, value equals in.nextInt. So the user would type in some value, and we keep looping while value is greater than or equal to 100, because that means that they did not enter an integer less than 100. So it's really good for data validation such as this. Another really good example is getting a password from a user. If the user does not enter the correct password, the program does not continue. Flowcharts are very good for planning out your loops. To avoid spaghetti code, that's code that's more difficult to debug, modify, and maintain, never have an arrow that points inside the loop body, and don't have flow lines cross one another. So you'll notice in these two examples, the one on the left is the pre-test condition, the pre-test loop. While and for are tested before the loop is entered. And in the example on the right, that's an example of a post-test loop, where the loop control condition is tested after the loop is run at least once. So, processing sentinel values. A sentinel value can denote the end of a set of data, but it is not part of the data itself. For example, if we want to keep getting salary entered from the user until some certain condition happens, such as the user enters -1. Nobody's going to have a salary of -1, so that value is outside the data set. So in this example, we initialize salary to whatever the user types in. While salary is not equal to -1, we add the salary to our total, we increment our count of salaries, and then we get the next salary. If the next salary equals -1, then we're done. Notice the way these statements are ordered. The sentinel value, in this case -1, will not be added to the data set. It will not be added to the total. And that's exactly what we want. It's very important when using sentinel values that you don't count them in your total list of data in your data set, and you don't add them to your total. When we are averaging a set of values, we want to declare and initialize a sum variable to 0. That's also called an accumulator variable, a variable that's going to accumulate the values. We also need to declare and initialize a count variable, some variable we're going to use for our counter. Then we need to declare and initialize an input variable. So what is the current value that's being entered? We will prompt the user with instructions such as enter a test score. Our loop will loop until the sentinel value is entered. So in our prompt to the user, we want to say, or -1 to quit, for example. We will save the entered value to the input variable. If the input is not the sentinel value, we add it to our total and we increment our count, and keep doing that until the user enters -1. We have to make sure that we have at least one entry before we divide, because a divide by zero error will cause our program to crash. Here's an example. I encourage you to hit the pause button, type up this example. It's complete on the next slide, but type up this example and get it running. That will absolutely help you with practicing your programming skills and using Sentinel values. Here's the rest of that code, and this is complete. Recall, in NetBeans, you do have to leave that package statement at the top. Boolean variables in Sentinels. A Boolean variable can be used to control a loop, and we sometimes call this a flag. So if we want to say enter salaries or -1 to finish, and then we set some Boolean variable done equal to false. So while not done, so not false, will be true, we enter the loop. We get that input from the user. We check to see if it's the Sentinel value. If it is the Sentinel value, we set done equal to true. If it's not the Sentinel value, we add it to our total and increment our counter.